So good afternoon and welcome to this Greenovation Forum. My name is Paul Linden and I'm moderating this event this afternoon. This is the third of these fora for this academic year in which we're focusing on water, and the topic today is water for energy and energy for water. And we have a distinguished lineup who I'll introduce in a minute. But before I do so, I want to say a couple of things in welcome. One is to just say that this year, 2009, has already brought some significant changes both nationally and on the UC campus. And in particular, the Environment Sustainability Initiative that was hosting this series is transforming into the Sustainability Solutions Institute, which I will direct and be ably supported by two deputy directors, Vish Krishnan from the Rady School of Management and Ralph Keeling from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And Lisa Schaefer will be our executive director, and Charlie Kennel will continue as our senior strategist. So we have a very impressive team, I believe, and our role is to promote and develop interdisciplinary solutions to environmental problems, bringing together the expertise from the campus and from the surrounding community, but also, we hope, from further afield to address important environmental problems and to try and provide the integration between the sciences and engineering and policy, social sciences, arts and humanities to get holistic solutions to some of the problems that we face in society. So you'll be seeing the new logo SSI replacing ESI. I hope it's not too confusing over the coming months, but we're now in this new phase, which I think is really a major development for the campus. Anyway, I'm very pleased to see you all here. This is a record crowd, so thank you very much all for coming. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is Professor Julian Schroeder. Julian is the Novartis Professor of Plant Sciences here at UC San Diego. He's a very distinguished scientist, receiving his PhD from the Max Planck Institute and the University of Göttingen in Germany. And I'm going to let you read the rest of his biography and get him to come and speak to us. So, Julian, please.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you all very much for coming. So my talk today on water is going to be looking into the future, and I want to talk about engineering drought tolerance in plants. Are we there? What is the future? What are the possibilities? And of course the globe is covered to 70% with water, but that's saline, ocean water, salt water. And to sustain life on Earth, we need fresh water. And of course, fresh water is a big issue. And in addition to this, we're also looking at changes in precipitation due to climate change. And of course, one of the issues we're dealing with is if we have increased desertification in the tropical and the equatorial regions, particularly in the southern hemisphere, we see how the land availability is narrowing. So what is the relevance of fresh water to humans? And so let's take a look at people affected by water scarcity on the planet. In 1995, about 500 million people were living under conditions of water scarcity or water stress. And it's interesting that in 1995, the same number, 500 million people, lived under conditions of undernourished or malnourished. And this number is predicted to increase in large part due to population growth, but also due to increase in the quality of life of many people, as well as also climate change. And already last year, the estimated number of people on the planet living under undernourished or malnourished conditions was about 950 million, so approximately double. So this predicted trend here is already happening to a degree. So why do we need water? What does human society use water for? And that's shown here. For the last 100 years, you can see the global increase in freshwater use. What do we use most of our water for? For agriculture. Globally, that's about 2/3. And in arid regions of the world, that percentage of water use for agriculture is more on the level of 80 or 90%. So a lot of this water is used for agriculture. And of course, if we don't use it, these are the results. We have drought-stressed plants and drought-stressed fields. This is not just an issue of feeding the world, it's also an economic issue. And as we can see in this slide summarizes economic impacts of a drought in 1998 in Texas. And alone in Texas, the estimated economic losses from that drought were for production losses over $2 billion, and in terms of statewide economic impact, because as you know, this is not just a matter of crop production, but also distribution, selling, and so it was about $5.7 billion. That's just one state and one drought. So this is, of course, very important, and that leads us to the question, where do we go from here? And the answer, of course, is that many things have to be done in parallel, and I will be addressing one of these subjects today, namely, can we engineer plants to be more efficient? What are the type of technologies that are going to be used in the future? And sometimes I feel like it's more like this. So let's take a look at the past for a second. So agricultural technology has improved a lot over the last 60 years. And this is roughly the amount of area relative to the whole United States used today in agriculture. Of course, it doesn't focus on Nevada, but this is the amount of land used. If we had had no technological improvements since 1930 or so, for the same agricultural production that we put out today, we would have needed this much land. So we've had a huge improvement in land efficient use, and that also involves water efficient use. And this might also be very relevant for the future. If we look into the future, this is from a study of John Boyer that was published in Science. And what John Boyer estimates is that the actual yield from crops that we're looking at today is about 21% of what it could be under optimal conditions. And he estimates that a large part of these losses come from environmental stresses, 69% here. And that's due to factors like drought, salinity, heat, pathogens, ozone, and so on. So the question for the future is, can we increase this margin? At the same time, we have climate change, and that's pushing towards decreasing this. So we have there's a huge potential for improvement, but there's also work in terms of holding the line. So why is it that plants need so much water? Why is that? Where does this water go? What is it used for? Of course, all life needs water, but the reason that plants need very much water is because they lose a lot of water while they're breathing in, while they're taking in carbon dioxide, CO2 from the atmosphere. Plants have little microscopic breathing pores in their surface called stomata, or stomatal pores, and these pores are used to breathe in, to take in the carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Plants fix the carbon and build all the nutrients and cell walls that we need. At the same time, they produce oxygen, but water evaporates through these pores, and plants lose about 95% of their water by evaporation. And if we look at these pores under a microscope, so if we look at this leaf here under a microscope, this is what the stomatal breathing pores look like. They're microscopic. Diameter of this pore is maybe 10 microns. That's 1/2500th of an inch. So they're very small. They're surrounded by two cells called guard cells. And fortunately, plants can open or close these pores. Now, under drought stress, plants produce a hormone that I'll be talking about a little bit today called abscisic acid, or ABA in short. And this is the drought stress hormone. This is the hormone that allows plants to survive under drought stress. And so under drought stress, ABA would close the stomatal pores. However, as you might imagine, many plants are not very good at closing their stomatal pores. They've been, you might forget to grow some plants, they get very wilty. Some plants have a very weak response, don't close their stomatal pores very well. And so in my research, in my laboratory, we're interested in the signaling pathway, how this hormone, ABA, triggers the closing of the stomatal pores. I'm going to shift for a second and tell you a little bit about my own background and how I got into this field. I was working in a laboratory, in a neurobiological, biophysical laboratory, looking at ion channels, and I was working with my advisor here, Erwin Nair, and this is his colleague, Bert Suckman. So yeah, that's Bert, and that's Erwin. And Erwin Nair and Bert Suckman developed a revolutionary technique that revolutionized the understanding of neurological electrical signaling, and they received the Nobel Prize in Medicine for their work. And while I was in their lab, or in Erwin's lab, we decided we wanted to ask if these kind of electrical impulses exist in plants, and it opened up a Pandora's box of understanding how plant signaling works. So that's how I got into this field. So one of the things we learned in the guard cells that surround the stomatal pores is that ABA closes these pores by activation and regulation of various proteins in the membrane that actually transmit electrical signals. I won't go into the details, but this model shown here is used by my lab and a number of labs around the world to understand the genes and the mechanisms that act between the hormone ABA and the closing of the stomatal pores. There are many steps in this pathway. And what we're learning from this work is that there are not only transmitters of the signal, but also negative regulators or brakes on the pathway. So some time ago, we were able to use this knowledge to show a first mutant that's more drought tolerant. We use a lab plant called Arabidopsis because it's very amenable to genetic and research. The genome is sequenced, and so on and so forth. And this is an example from this initial study. We here are showing plants that haven't been watered for 26 days. And what you can see on the left, the wild type plant, the control plant, these leaves at the bottom of the plant, at the base called rosette leaves, are wilted and shriveled, while in our mutant plant, the plant retains water more effectively because this mutation amplifies the signaling by the hormone, and we get an enhanced drought response. There is a small biotechnology company that has taken this knowledge on and to test the efficiency of this particular gene for engineering drought tolerance in the related brassica species, and they're at least reporting that they're seeing increased drought tolerance in the field, but that's ongoing work. Now, when we originally published this gene, as I say, I believe it was the first one such gene, so I got phone calls from the press, but also from individuals saying, you know, I have these plants out here, and I think something's wrong with their ERA1 gene, and can you give me some advice? And my answer was, I believe there are probably many different such genes that could be manipulated, and this is only one. And usually that led to, oh, really? Okay. So we have identified, and also others have since identified other genes. This is another example from my laboratory. These plants weren't watered for only about 12 days, and if you look closely in the wild type, you might see how the leaves are wilty and drooping, while in the mutant they are better at retaining water, and the plant cells are more turgid, is the term that we use. So this is all very good, but really what our research is showing is that the signal transduction for stress is a complex network of mechanisms and genes, like this subway path here. And so there are many genes in the network that function in transmitting the signal. Not only are there many genes that transmit the signal, but there are many breaks in the pathway, negative regulators that slow down the signaling of the hormone. And the examples I just showed you was simply genes that we took away, single genes we took out of the plant. We removed a break here or there, and we were able to amplify the signaling. But apart from this, there's much more to be learned. And so in a biological sense, what we're looking at is drought causes the hormone ABA to be produced. There must be receptors, and that sets off a signaling network, which then sets off events of gene expression and metabolic events, which then give you drought tolerance as a whole. Now, an important gene and mechanism in this, at the top of the pyramid of this drought signaling, are the receptors for ABA. Interestingly, they have not been known. That is, there were a few reports, but apparently the true receptors are unknown. And in recent research in my laboratory, we've used a so-called proteomics approach to identify a protein family that acts very early in signaling. And research of a colleague at UC Riverside using a chemical genetics approach, Sean Cutler, has identified the same proteins, and the data is very strong that we have the ABA receptors. So that means in the next few months, hopefully there will be a publication, and the top of the pyramid, the gene that controls all of this, the genes will be known. That's, as I say, looking into the future, but there are many important mechanisms that need to be known here. Now the question is this: if we understand the mechanisms, how are we going to help society? The two examples I showed you earlier were examples where you reduce the expression of a native gene in the plant and you get drought tolerance. You reduce a break in the pathway. But if you really want to work on this, you're going to have to use transgenics in the future. And of course, transgenics have been used in the US for a long time, are fairly well accepted. In Europe, there have been more issues, but we see that in many countries, we see that the acceptance of transgenic plants is increasing, in part because people see that this can help with the environment. So yeah, there are some skeptics, as we see in this slide. And I should say, though, that genetic engineering of plants has been around a long time. And this example here of this corn cob, this is an example of genetic engineering by Native Americans some 8,000 years ago. So what you see here is a full-grown corn cob. The original plant that this was derived from is the teosinte plant shown up here. And Native Americans, through genetic engineering, got from here down to the corn cob. And today we know that the major difference between this teosinte and the corn cob are 5 genes, selection of 5 genes. And that was genetic engineering. The research today that has shown this is work of John Dobley and others in Madison, Wisconsin, and elsewhere. So we see that genetic engineering has been around for a long time, selection of genes for improved crop traits, whether it's a big corn cob, whether it's a larger tomato, or many other examples. So there is work also in drought tolerance in terms of overexpressing genes. And I want to show you an example here from work that's ongoing in China at Huazhong Agricultural University. In this case, a field screen was done for genes, that transcription factors that might improve drought tolerance. And you can see here in the field trial, this is the more drought tolerant transgenic plant compared to the wild type. A slight difference, but an improvement in drought tolerance. Another example is work from a small biotech company here in California, Mendel Biotechnology, that has screened Arabidopsis. That's our lab plant, our lab Drosophila, or lab rat, if you will. And they used these genes and then worked with Monsanto to see if they could improve drought tolerance in corn. And this is also from a recent publication. You see here the wild type and the corn overexpressing this one transcription factor. So there are advances in this field of engineering improved drought tolerance. So the question is, are we there yet? Are we there? This looks great. Of course, there are field trials going on now. This is not yet in the marketplace. There's a lot of testing that has to be done. And I would venture that this is the beginning. We're at the beginning. If you think of the microelectronics revolution, we're roughly at the stage when the first transistor radios came out. Of course, you could say we're done, but we're not at the integrated circuits yet. We're still working on these type of improvements. But why do I think that there's room for improvement? We have here drought tolerance that might give us 5% improvement of yield. I'll give you an example. Take a plant seed. If you take a plant seed, that's a life form. There's an embryonic plant in that seed if you slice it open. And you can store a seed. It's desiccated. It has to be dry. It's actually drought-tolerant life. You can store that seed for 10, maybe 20, or even more years. You add water to it, and it comes to life. It continues to grow. So the seed is arrested in growth. It's drought-tolerant, and the hormone that causes that seed to be tolerant to drought is ABA, and the receptors are the same, as we know now, work that will be published. So this is just a cross-section of a seed here. If you slice through a seed, there's a little plant with a root and 2 leaves, and it's stored at room temperature. We're not talking about cryoprotection. It's stored at room temperature for 20 or decades, and all you have to do is add water. So you can maintain life during a drought and then restart it up again. So there's a lot that we have to learn scientifically, and unfortunately we can't take forever to make these discoveries because they are relevant for our future. I want to talk about another subject during this talk, namely heat stress. Heat stress and drought stress go very close together. This is from recent studies in Science, and the upshot of these studies are that higher temperatures are seen as reducing the global harvests because heat stress does disrupt plant growth. And I want to tell you about some recent research in my laboratory that links what we've talked about today to heat stress. And that's the following. We learned that the hormone ABA closes the stomatal pores. Interestingly, these stomatal pores also respond to atmospheric CO2 and to CO2 inside the leaf. And elevated CO2 reduces stomatal apertures. Maybe not as strong as here, but they do close the stomata. So we already have 40% higher CO2 in the atmosphere today than pre-industrial revolution. So already plants are narrowing their apertures. And there's a number of global effects of this CO2 regulation of this stomatal apertures. For one thing, increased CO2 reduces stomatal opening in plants on a global level to different degrees in different plants. That will reduce the ability of CO2 to flow into the leaves in the plants. Also, there's been a study that proposes that there's a reduced continental freshwater runoff, reduced also precipitation, and that can be that's linked to this reduced transpiration or evaporation of water from plants. Now, another very important subject here is if you reduce the stomatal apertures of leaves, you reduce water evaporation. Not all a bad thing, but if your plant is heat sensitive, then the temperature of the leaf will increase further because plant leaves can cool themselves by evaporation, by perspiration. We cool ourselves, and that's how plants can cool the leaves. So this is actually enhancing the heat stress already induced by global warming. And there's also a theory that elevated CO2 might enhance the water use efficiency of plants. That would be a good thing. But we don't know the CO2 sensors. We don't know the mechanisms, how plants respond to CO2. In my lab in the last few years, we've been characterizing the genes that cause elevated CO2 to reduce their apertures. And we've published a few of these, some of these in collaborations, last year a paper in Nature and so on. And we've discovered several mechanisms, but the CO2 binding proteins, if you will, sensors that respond to CO2 are unknown and haven't come out of genetic screens. So we used a genomic approach and probed many different CO2 binding proteins, looking at thousands of genes that are expressed in the guard cells and other leaf cells. And then through mutagenesis have found 2 genes that together are CO2 binding proteins, but that play an important role in this response. So here's some actual data. What you're seeing here is the way a wild-type plant responds. If you elevate CO2, the stomata close. If you reduce CO2, they open. In this double mutant, in these CO2 binding proteins, the response is very weak. There is a background. Maybe we have to make a triple mutant, what we call in the lab, but you can see this greatly reduced response to CO2. Of course, we've done a lot of other research around this. One of the things that we've done is if we take these CO2 binding proteins and with the right promoters, overexpress them in the right tissues, we can greatly enhance the water use efficiency of the plants. So we're enhancing the ability of the plant to respond to our atmospheric CO2 increase. These are the first 4 transgenic plants we looked at in the laboratory, and the average increase in water use efficiency was 44%. So we're kind of excited. We haven't even tried hard and already boosted water use efficiency in our Arabidopsis plants by about 44%. So there's much to be discovered. There's a lot of potential at this time to work on different aspects of drought tolerance and water use efficiency of plants. I will leave you with a quote here from Norman Borlaug. He is known as the father of the Green Revolution and the 1970 Peace Nobel laureate. And in a publication in 2000, Norman Borlaug wrote, "It took some 10,000 years to expand food production to the current level of about 5 billion tons per year. By 2025, we will have to nearly double current production again," and it has been increasing since 2000, which is good. "This increase cannot be accomplished unless farmers across the world have access to many tools, including new biotechnological breakthroughs that can increase the yields, dependability, and nutritional quality of our basic food crops." And so just to finish up, yes, we need many different approaches, and so thank you very much for your attention.
My pleasure now to introduce the second major speaker today, who's Timothy Brick. He's the chair of the Metropolitan Water District. He's been on the board for 24 years and has vast experience in this area, and we're very delighted to have him and to hear his presentation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here today to address this very important topic of water and energy. Apropos of the last discussion, I wanted to call to your attention a comment made by the new Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, who in an article and interview in the Los Angeles Times on February 4th said that he fears that the effects of climate change are so great that California may be looking at a prospect in which agriculture is wiped out by the end of the century. And he added, and the cities will have a very hard time too. So, you know, there's different things going on here that are very ominous and very important for people to really focus on if we are really going to achieve sustainability for the future of Southern California. I want to talk today about the relationship between water and energy in California, and then talk some about energy management at water agencies and how it's being viewed at this time. Talk specifically about the Metropolitan Water District and our energy management program, and what are some steps for the future that need to be looked at. California has an immense gross domestic product that's 11.5% of the U.S. gross domestic product. A population exceeds 37.4 million people, and we're adding every year a substantial number of new residents, largely ingrown, largely coming from our children and grandchildren. And while we now have a population of 37.4, it's expected that by 2040 we will have a population of 54 million people. Southern California is expected to rise rapidly as well in conjunction with that. And that population stress is putting stress on water resources. This is kind of the water situation today, this year. Not long term, but this year, in which we find on the Los Angeles Aqueduct the lowest deliveries on record. On the Colorado River, we hope it's coming out of a drought, but there's been 8 years of drought, It looks like it's about average this year, and it was a little over average last year, so we hope it's coming out of a drought. But the Colorado River Aqueduct and the Colorado River are really major sources of supply for Southern California and very critical. And then also locally, the precipitation has been very low in the last 3 years all throughout Southern California. Although I understand San Diego is about at average this year. So, but don't be deceived actually statewide by the water picture by a few days of rain, because January was very dry, among the driest years on record. And it'll be very difficult to make up for that. This is compounded by fishery conflicts, which have really caused cutbacks in the amount of pumping of water in the state of California, particularly from the state water system. So much so that the director of the Department of Water Resources of the state of California says we may be at the start, mind you, of the worst California drought in recent history. Energy and water are really inextricably linked. A lot of people have missed the connection between the two, and yet it's vital. It's vital as to new water sources. It's vital as to the treatment of water. It's vital to energy. And when we talk about the big stress on managing carbon emissions and other things like that, water is the way that the medium through which many of the effects of climate change are going to be felt upon the population. Water use consumes enormous amounts of electricity, and California is a state in which 2/3 of, we kind of have an imbalance in resources here. 2/3 of the rainfall falls in Northern California, 2/3 of the population is in Southern California. This shows you the water-related energy use in California, and this is as a percentage of electrical production, gigawatt hours, in the year 2006. And you'll see that of the total electric consumption in California, water-related use is about 19% of that. And if you break that out further, if you look at that bar on the right, you'll see that about 15.5% of that is coming from the end use. So it's the treatment of water and heating of water particularly. So conserving heated water is particularly important in terms of water conservation as well as energy conservation. Now, if you look at the 3.1%, that's the State Water Project, and the 0.4% is Metropolitan Water District itself. But before you let us off the hook, in terms of being a major electricity user in the state of California, you should know that of the 3.1%, Metropolitan Water District represents about 70 to 75% of that as well in water services that we're purchasing from the State Water Project. So Southern California basically is using about 3.5% of the electricity in the state of California. This is for water specifically. This is the big picture of energy production in California and where it's coming from, what kind of sources. And you can see that the nuclear is 14.8. A large proportion is coming from natural gas, but a significant amount is coming from coal resources as well, often outside the state of California. And there are hydro resources and some renewable resources. The renewable level has remained remarkably the same, although there is commitments by the electric utilities to substantially increase the production of and purchase of renewable resources in the future. With regard to greenhouse gas emissions, it's important to note from that last chart that more than 60% of the electricity used in the state is coming from fossil fuel combustion. And that electricity generation is contributing 23% of the global greenhouse gas emissions in California. More than 50% of these come from imported power coming from outside the state of California, from coal plants in the Southwest and in Utah. Now, California's grand plan to reduce global greenhouse gases was expressed in AB 32, a bill by then Assemblywoman, now State Senator Fran Pavley, which sets a goal of reducing statewide greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. So this is really what all of the energy users in California have set. This is the standard for all of the energy users in California, is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions back to 1990. Let me tell you a little bit about Metropolitan Water District to kind of set the context for our use. And we represent 6 counties in Southern California, all the way from Ventura to the Mexican border along the coastal plain of Southern California. The San Diego County Water Agency is our largest customer in terms of sales. Los Angeles is our largest customer in terms of size. We serve almost 19 million people at this point, so more than half the population of the state of California, with a massive economy, a rapidly growing population, 220,000 a year, and we're providing somewhat more than half of the water resources for Southern California. This is where Southern California gets its water, and we showed you a little bit of that before. You'll see that the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which is owned and operated by the city of Los Angeles, comes from the eastern Sierra Nevadas. It was the first system developed in 1913 to import water into Southern California. The Colorado River Aqueduct was developed by the Metropolitan Water District. We were formed to develop the Colorado River Aqueduct and to bring the Colorado River into the coastal plain of Southern California. And we did that during the 30s and began delivering water in 1941. The State Water Project came in during the 60s and began delivering water in 1970. And the Metropolitan Water District is the distributor of all of the water for the State Water Project. This is the mix. About 45% of the water is coming from local resources, surprisingly. I bet a lot of people would be surprised at that figure. 45% of the water resources in Southern California are local. Now, there's a little bit of fudging in there because the Los Angeles Aqueduct is considered a local resource, but anyway, it's not exactly local, but the Eastern Sierras, they don't think it's local, but anyway. And then the State Water Project is about 36%, with the Colorado River, and that's down, is 19%. That's down from recent years in which the Colorado River Aqueduct historically has provided more water than the State Water Project. This is Metropolitan system throughout Southern California. We have 242 miles of aqueducts. We have lots of pipelines crisscrossing the area in order to deliver water to 26 member agencies, 14 cities and 12 regional water agencies. We have 7 major pumping stations, 5 treatment plants, which are among the largest in the world. All 5 of them are in the top 10 in the world. And we have 16 hydroelectric plants of our own. Now, energy management is extremely important to water agencies and is increasingly being recognized as the pivotal planning parameter for water agencies. Cost is one of the reasons. The wildly spiking prices of recent years have created a tremendous amount of economic instability, and it made it very difficult for us. There's another element, which is that new water treatment technologies, in fact, are more energy intensive. And also, we need to address the greenhouse gas emissions related to energy generation. Another factor that isn't on the chart is that through our planning for water supplies in the future, we can actually affect how we use energy by emphasizing the less energy intensive uses. So all of these are very important factors that really come into consideration in terms of the planning in the future of water in Southern California. I referred to the electric price volatility, and you can see how the prices have been spiking and what the prognosis for the future is in terms of the price of electricity. Since water users are using 19% of the electricity in the state, this is clearly a major factor for us all. It's also important to realize that many of the new treatment technologies that are coming in order to improve the quality of drinking water, which I would contend is the highest in the world in Southern California, but we're working hard to improve that technology. And those technologies are generally energy intensive. They require more energy use than previous methods that have been used. And probably, well, the biggest one right now that is now being rolled out throughout Southern California in recent years is the introduction of ozone as a treatment technology, which is a $1 billion project for Southern California and is being put in at all 5 of our treatment plants. and is a significant increase in the amount of energy that is used. There are other treatment technologies with membrane technology and ultraviolet disinfection and other steps like that, which also are energy intensive. And this chart will give you some sense of how much of an increase in energy consumption and cost will come from the introduction of those technologies. You can see here that as you go across the chart, conventional treatment doesn't use a lot of energy. Ultraviolet is really just used in specialized applications at this time. Ozone is being widely introduced throughout Southern California, as I referred to, and you can see the significant increase, 200% increase in the amount of electricity used for treating water with the addition of ozone. And then microfiltration and reverse osmosis are used more in recycling and desalination applications, and you can see particularly reverse osmosis, which is kind of the standard for both recycling and desal applications, is a very large energy user. Also, in terms of planning for water resources for the future, you can see how the energy equation is very important to our planning. And so on the left, you see the State Water Project. Actually, this chart is in cubic meters, which is probably a language that most of you don't speak. But it'll give you a sense of the relative energy consumption associated with these various energy sources. The State Water Project using 2.6, the Colorado River Aqueduct using substantially less, and recycled water, actually not very much energy consumption. But of course, the best solution really is to maximize the efficiency of water use through conservation, which generally requires little or no energy. This is how Southern California's planning scenario has changed radically in the last 20 years. In the early 90s, you can see there was a heavy reliance on the Colorado River Aqueduct, CRA, and the State Water Project, the imported water sources. And through the drought, the last drought in the 90s, the drought that occurred from 1988 to 1992, we came to the realization that we really had to diversify our planning sources and move away from the imported sources, which were increasingly less reliable. And so, as you can see from this chart, these two charts show the change that has occurred. So we now place much less reliance in the future on the Colorado River Aqueduct and the State Water Project. They remain important sources for the future, but we're going to be using them less. And instead, we've increased the amount of local resources, conservation, and storage and transfer programs. The new treatment technologies that I talked about are important also to consider in that they dramatically increase annual energy costs, as well as the dependence upon, they make us more dependent upon reliable energy sources and more committed really to develop renewable energy sources in order to provide a stability for the water industry. This is really driving water agencies to energy management options that will reduce costs and maintain water quality compliance. So both of those elements are absolutely critical. This is what our energy cost picture looks like, and you can see from this that we're spending about $250 million a year on energy purchases. And of that, the vast majority of it is for pumping water from Northern California into Southern California in the State Water Project, $213.5 million of that. And a relatively smaller amount on the Colorado River Aqueduct. Actually, the treatment of water is a relatively small part of it. It's that blue slice there. And that includes all of our facilities. It includes all of the treatment plants and the office building and everything. So even though I said that ozone was going to double the treatment, you can see that that's a relatively small part of the overall water picture, and that it's really the pumping of water that is really causing the high energy usage. As we look to energy management programs and styling the right approach to the future, we're evaluating very carefully the impacts of climate change and legislation with regard to greenhouse gas emissions, and looking at how we can avoid risks coming in the future and have a more reliable system so that we're not going to be dependent upon spikes in energy prices or unreliability of energy sources and such like that. And cost control is a key factor for us as well. So our goal really is to design, construct, and operate facilities in an energy efficient, cost-effective and sustainable manner. And the strategies you see here: reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, improve energy efficiency and energy conservation, manage power resources in the most cost-effective manner, and implement renewable energy projects. In fact, I would say that the water agencies need to be the leaders in implementing renewable energy solutions, not only to show a model for the public, but also to improve the reliability of water systems for the future, and to really take sustainability seriously. Now, I told you about the 1990 goal that has been set for the year 2020, and kind of by accident, Metropolitan's in really good shape. It just happened that in the year 1990, we used a lot of State Water Project water, and so our greenhouse gas emissions, as you can see, were enormous that year. And we've done really well since then because of dedicated leadership of the board, of course. But you can see that, in terms of meeting that goal, that's not a challenge for us. But there are other factors that we want to include in order to improve reliability and to be good public citizens. I really think that the water industry needs to go green. Blue is green and green is blue. So we do things like to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. We have put a big stress on adding hybrid vehicles in our fleet, improving boiler operations and efficiency at administration buildings. Our building has won models for energy efficiency, and we work very closely with all of the utilities that were in their service territory in order to improve efficiency and to deal with conservation. And also very importantly is that through our educational programs and through all of our programs, really, we're working hard to promote energy and sustainability awareness. Sustainability has become a very active theme. With regard to managing power sources, Metropolitan benefits from our small hydro plants. We have 16 small hydro plants, and we also get large hydro, as a matter of fact, from Hoover Dam and from Parker Dam on the Colorado River, which contribute a large part of the energy that we use. So a large part, as you can see from this, is really coming from renewable generation. And you can see how the energy use has changed over the years. The small hydro is the green line, and we've improved. We began in about 1980 and have substantially expanded our small hydro resources and probably will continue to do so in the near future. And at the bottom you can see the orange line is what our treatment plants are using in energy. So you can see that just our small hydro plants on our system, which are basically designed to recapture head or to recapture the potential energy in the water as it falls on the system, substantially are overshadowed by the amount that we get from small hydro. That is, the treatment plants are more than served by just our own production of small hydro. And here we see also the consumption in renewable generation. We're exploring, we have these 16 small hydro systems throughout our system. We're now looking, most of them were planned in the 80s based on assumptions of energy costs and such and reliability in the 80s. So we're now going in again and looking at the system again to see where else we can extract more energy from our system by capturing that falling water basically. And our small hydro plants are located throughout Southern California really, up at Castaic Lake in the west there, and then all through the system coming down even into San Diego County. They're producing 523,000 megawatt hours a year and $26 million in revenue, which we're selling this power to local utilities in Southern California. We're making a move towards solar as well. We have a 1 megawatt plant coming in at Skinner, our major treatment plant, and we're also looking at rolling out about 15 megawatts more in the near future. We estimate a capital cost of $8 to $10 million for the per megawatt for the solar development, and we're going to expect on the Skinner plant that we're going to receive a significant rebate through the California Solar Initiative. We're also proceeding on some of our other plants and are expanding our solar operation as we go. Wind power, we own a lot of land in the desert and are evaluating the effectiveness of wind power. and are looking carefully at the cost and reliability factors involved with it and undertaking studies in order to determine whether we can develop substantial wind power resources as well. The big issues that are affecting us as we look to the future with regard to the development of renewables include cost, transmission capacity and getting it where we need it, and the reliability of the system. And a lot of that deals with the intermittent and variable nature of solar, photovoltaic and wind energy. And we're looking very carefully at technology advances. This is a view of our estimate of what are likely to be the costs of the development of the various renewable options as we look across, and we see that some are obviously more advantageous than others, and hopefully we can work for the reduction of the costs of the renewable resources in order to meet the global greenhouse commitment, as well as to go green, truly grow green. So the next steps for Metropolitan in terms of energy management are to really continue and enhance our energy efficiency and conservation programs. And that's really probably the most important thing we can do for effective energy management. And then to continue the implementation of cost-effective renewable energy projects such as the solar photovoltaic systems and the hydroelectric power plant expansion and wind energy as well. And also we're going to develop board policies to address the reduction of global greenhouse gas emissions. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.